So, today we're going to try and deconstruct the war in Ukraine by looking at it from two totally different moments in time. We're going to put the hard military reality on the ground right up against a speculative future scenario. Why? To try and understand the deeper logic and, yeah, the contradictions of this whole conflict. Let's dive into these two truths and see what they might just tell us about where this war is headed.
And we're going to start not in the past, but in the near future. Just imagine it. The date is February 4th, 2026. There's this fragile sense of hope hanging in the air.
And boom, right away we're hit with this massive paradox. You've got these high-stakes peace talks, literally hours away from starting. But overnight, Ukraine gets slammed with the huge wave of strikes, all aimed at its energy infrastructure. And this one question really frames everything we're talking about today. What is the strategy here? What's the play?
To even begin to unravel that mystery from 2026, we first have to rewind. We've got to understand the brutal, day-to-day reality of the war 2 years earlier. We need to look at the ground truth as it really was back in late 2024.
Now this map from the Institute for the Study of War, it tells a story. And it's not a story of big, bold advances. It's a story of a brutal, inch-by-inch struggle around Donetsk. I mean, just look at those small, contested areas, how dense that front line is. This is not a war of sweeping maneuvers. No way. It's a slow, grinding, and unbelievably costly battle fought in trenches for every single town.
The military term for this, and you see it in the ISW report, is a war of attrition. What's happening is that Ukrainian forces are using what's called a defense in depth. Basically, they're willing to trade small bits of territory to make the advancing Russian forces pay the highest possible price in casualties. It's really effective at slowing Russia down, but man, it creates this brutal, bloody stalemate. A stalemate where victory isn't measured in miles, but in lives lost.
So you might be thinking, if Russia is advancing, even slowly, does that mean they're winning? Well, it turns out that all depends on how you define a gain.
And this brings us to a really crucial distinction. You have tactical gains and you have operational gains. A tactical gain is, say, taking a single village or a specific position. It matters right there on that spot. But an operational gain? That's the big one. That's a major breakthrough that could actually collapse an entire section of the front line. It's something that really changes the whole strategic picture.
So here's the absolute key takeaway from that 2024 assessment. Yes, Russia is achieving those smaller tactical gains, but, and this is a huge but, it is failing to achieve the big, war-altering operational ones. Their big push on the strategic town of Chasiv Yar has stalled out. Their reserves, both in manpower and equipment, are seriously degraded. The bottom line from the assessment is that their massive summer offensive is probably going to culminate, that's the military term for basically running out of gas, very, very soon.
Okay, so let's jump back forward to 2026. If the ground war in 2024 was running out of steam without a major breakthrough, that brings us right back to our central question. What on earth is the logic behind shifting to this massive bombing campaign against cities right on the eve of peace talks? It just seems to make no sense.
And this is exactly the question that was raised in this really fiery 2026 commentary by an analyst named Playman Paskov. He points out this deep, deep contradiction. The very people Russia claimed it was there to liberate are the ones who are bearing the absolute brunt of a campaign designed to freeze them in the dark. And right here, this is where you see the two truths from our title just collide. On one hand, you have that clinical military assessment from 2024, tactical gains, attrition, culmination. And on the other, you have the brutal human reality of 2026, terrorizing millions of people by taking away their heat and their light in the middle of winter. How do these two things possibly connect? The 2026 discussion then offers this really provocative alternative. If your goal was to force Ukraine to the negotiating table, why not just target the military supply lines coming in from Poland? You cut off the flow of ammunition and equipment, and the army literally grinds to a halt. Now that would be a militarily decisive move, one that could cripple the Ukrainian army without directly targeting millions of civilians.
So if a more direct military option was on the table, why choose the one that maximizes civilian suffering? Why go with a strategy that seems designed not to win the war, but just to punish innocent people? Well, the theory that gets floated in 2026 points to a profound disconnect between the Ukrainian people and their leadership.
Paskov's argument is that the suffering of ordinary people, well, it just doesn't factor into the calculations of a leadership class that already has its exit strategy planned out. The suggestion here is pretty stark, that their families, their wealth, and their futures are already safe and sound, somewhere outside of Ukraine.
And this theory gets bolstered by a speculative poll that's cited in that same 2026 discussion. It claimed that a staggering 40% of the Ukrainian population was willing to give up territory just to make the fighting stop. Now that is a significant number, and it suggests a real gap between what the public wants and the official policy. A gap that an enemy could absolutely exploit if they understood the psychology of a population that is just tired of war.
So the thinking here is, you see, bombing civilians is a totally ineffective way to negotiate if the negotiators themselves are completely insulated from that suffering. The pain just doesn't reach the people who are actually making the decisions.
But you know, a war like this is never just about the front line. Its impact extends far beyond the battlefield. That 2024 ISW report shows how the conflict was already sending these deep ripples through Russia itself, and honestly, across the whole globe.
And this slide reveals some of those hidden costs of the war, how it reshapes everything it touches. Domestically in Russia, you've got Putin's Time of Heroes program, basically militarizing the government by rewarding loyal veterans with power. Internally, the war is fueling a purge, a big crackdown on corruption inside the Ministry of Defense. And globally, the conflict just spills over, with a mysterious strike on a depot near Russia's main air base in Syria. Which brings us all the way back to where we started. In the end, how do you truly measure a war? Is the real story told by those shifting lines on a military map from 2024? Or is it better understood through those haunting questions from 2026? Questions about strategy, about suffering, and about that profound, perhaps tragic disconnect between the people who fight the wars and those who decide their fate.